Hi, today I'm going to be talking to you about the movie Divergent. And I know a lot of people have been talking about it already and you've probably seen reviews of it and you probably don't want to watch another one. And don't get me wrong, there's a certain beauty to your resistance. See what I did there? Okay, let's get into it. The first scene I'm going to draw your attention to is when Beatrice climbs on the roof of her house in abnegation. And the reason I'm drawing your attention to it is because it is such an unabnegation thing of her to do. And this is the first kind of indication we have of Beatrice questioning herself and her identity and her place in the world. The first time we see the Dauntless is when Beatrice is waiting in line to take her aptitude test. And this is also the first time we see Peter. In the book we don't see him this early on in the movie and we're not really sure who he is except that he's hassling the abnegation, asking whether they're giving the food they're not getting to the factionless, and he accuses them of taking it for themselves. And we see Beatrice want to stand up for these people but her brother stops her. This is an indication of what Beatrice is going to be like later on in the movie, her pull towards standing up for others, which is both selfless and brave of her. Beatrice's head turns at the exact moment that the train pulls up and we first see the Dauntless and they're jumping off the train. They look so cool. Beatrice thinks they look so cool and so do I. I think I'd be in Dauntless just because they look like so much fun. And I love the score that they decided to use in any kind of uniquely Dauntless moment because it's such an amazing score. So Beatrice takes her aptitude test and we find out she doesn't fit in anywhere. The test didn't work on her and she's going to have to choose for herself even though the test was supposed to help her choose. And we also meet Tori, who was so perfectly cast, I reckon, just from her attitude and the way she bounces on the ball of her feet as she's getting ready to administer the test. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of weird. Beatrice and Caleb go home and Beatrice tells her parents she was sick and that's why they sent her home early. And her parents tell her that abnegation is under scrutiny from erudite. They can't be breaking any rules. And the reason I found this scene weird is because they're eating in almost complete darkness, and I reread this scene in the book to see if this was what happened, and it doesn't mention anything about them eating in the dark. And the first thought I had was like, do abnegation reject light? Is it too selfish for them to have light? So I don't know what was with that in the scene, if it was just a choice by who made the movie, but yeah, I thought it was weird. So the next day we have the choosing ceremony where they choose which faction they're going to be in. And this is where we first meet Janine Matthews, who is the leader of Erudite. In the book we don't meet her and much later. She's more of just a presence that we're aware of and who we know about. But I'm really glad they decided to introduce her early on and made sure Tris knew her particularly because then she recognises her when she sees her later on. And if you take note in this scene, Caleb seems to be really happy to be meeting her, which is an indication of what is to come, I think. And this is the first time we kind of see a bit of defiance from Beatrice. She's usually quite reserved and doesn't really say much, but here we see her openly defiant towards Janine. And I think it's a bit of Tris's real personality shining through there. So Beatrice chooses Dauntless, and the first scene of her with the Dauntless is them running down the steps and along the street to get to the train station. And I just love this scene. I've got the Dauntless score back again. Everyone's kind of jumping out of their way, going, what's going on? And the Dauntless is just having so much fun. And Beatrice climbs up to the platform, and when she gets to the top, there's just this look in her eyes, this bright spark in her eyes, and she's all lit up, and I think this is the first time we see her properly happy, and it's really great. There are a lot of moments throughout this movie where Tris really comes into her own, and the first one of these, I think, is when she jumps off the roof into the Dauntless compound. Eric asks, who's it going to be? Who's going to be the first person to jump into Dauntless? And after a few moments of kind of awkward looking at each other, Beatrice is like, me, because she's just decides in that moment that she's going to do it. And she literally jumps into the unknown, and when she gets to the bottom of the net, she's just happy and lit up and glowing again. And this is also where we first meet Four, We don't know much about him yet. He's kind of mysterious, and you can tell by the look on Triss's face that she kind of wants to find out more about him. So 4 shows them around the Dauntless compound, and then we have them going into the cafeteria to eat dinner. And this is one of my favourite scenes, is when they're talking about their old factions and 4 tells them off, and Triss, being the curious person she is, asks him if he was Dauntless born or if he was a transfer as well. And he's like, what makes you think you can talk to me? And she's like, must be because you're so approachable. And it's just hilarious, and that sarcasm coming out in her is just so unabnegation of her. So we also meet Max in the scene. He welcomes the new people, and the Dauntless gather around to lift the new initiates onto their shoulders. So we get a little crowd surfing scene, and that Dauntless score is back. I know, I'll promise I'll stop talking about how much I love the Dauntless score. I am going to go download it from iTunes after I finish making this video. Yeah, another great moment where Triss just lights up. I'm going to talk to you about Peter. I think they did quite well with Peter. He's constantly calling Triss stiff like he does in the books, and he's really mean and annoying, but I didn't find him to be as cruel as I did in the books. And this might be due to the fact that they took out Edward's whole storyline, which really cements the cruelty in Peter. Speaking of which, Edward's storyline is completely taken out, and if you look at the end credits, there is someone actually cast as Edward whose role is actually Edward, so I'm not really sure who it is. If I was going to take a stab at it, I'd say the blonde guy who helps Christina when she's hanging from the bridge, and who congratulates Triss for standing up to Eric. But yeah, I'm not really sure who he is in the movie. Also Uriah. I would think he's the guy who invites Triss to go ziplining, but his storyline again is taken out completely, and we don't even see Lynn or Marlene. So I'm really interested to see if they actually keep them in the next movie or not. As well as Edward, who is in the next 2 books, so I am definitely interested to see how they explain that. Another one of the moments where Triss really comes into her own is when she's on the zip line and she gets to the end and she almost forgets to pull the brake, and the people down below are yelling at her to pull the brake, and she comes this close to hitting the wall, and then they start cheering for her and she's just like, yeah! And I just really liked that moment, so I thought I'd point that out. A thing I noticed in the movie that's not really in the book is that people are a lot more aware of divergence. There's this scene where we see Janine going into a garden room and she talks to Triss and her friends, and she goes into this room and Will's like, oh, they're probably hunting divergence, that's all they talk about at Erudite, which it shows that divergence is a lot more of a thing in the movie, and that they're a lot more feared, I think. And I think this was a good decision to have it like this. I think it really added to the movie. Now, one of my favourite scenes in the movie is after Triss is rescued by 4, when they're trying to push her off the edge of the pit, and 4 is washing her hands, and she flinches and reaches her hand down and puts it on his. And I liked this scene because it reminded me of a scene in the book. And when we rise hand in hand, I realised that if we'd both chosen differently, we might have ended up doing the same thing in a safer place, in grey clothes instead of black ones. And washing hands is such an abnegation thing to do. And I don't know if it was intentional, but the symbolism of this scene really resonated with me. A thing I think they did really well was the fear landscapes. They felt really real, and in particular the end of 4's fear landscape, when Marcus is coming into the room with the belt, they somehow managed to make 4 look small in the room, and I think they did that really well and made him look truly afraid. One of the big challenges of adapting a book to film is conveying the characters' thoughts and feelings, because you don't have that internal monologue like you do in a book. And I think Shailene Woodley does this so well as Triss. You always know what Triss is thinking or feeling by the look on her face and by her body language. And Shailene Woodley does such a great job of grounding a scene and getting to the realness of her, and she does this so effortlessly and wonderfully, so I think she's really perfectly cast as Triss. I'll end this video by talking about one of my favourite lines in the movie, is when Triss kicks the gun out of Peter's hand and he's like, you're not going to shoot me, and she's like, why do people keep saying that? Because it's so true, people just keep underestimating her character, and it's such a good line, I think. So I hope you enjoyed my video talking about Divergent, and I'll see you next time. Bye.